one. It's from Susie Wakefield.
Hello. Recently on Insiders, Malcolm Roberts gave Barry Cassidy his business card and asked Barry to get back to him when he had proof and data that there is a human element in our increasing climate change. I was hoping the panel could perhaps guide Barry with some fact and just not opinion on the human element in climate change.
I was going to start with Brian Cox, the scientist on the panel, and can you provide scientific data or evidence that might help Barry Cassidy convince Malcolm over here that human-induced climate change is a reality?
Well, yes, and I could sit here and read out figures until I'm blue in the face. I mean, interestingly, it's getting more worrying if you look at the temperature measurements now. I mean, 2015 and 2016 in particular have seen a quite shocking acceleration in many of the measures, be it surface temperatures, ocean temperatures, etc. So the first few months I noticed of 2016 have above the average, the pre-industrial average, have been pushing 1.5 degrees. Now, you can't read too much into individual years. You have to be careful because you see these graphs and they're spiky, but there's a clear rise. And
the latest data is actually suggesting that by 2024, 1.5 degree increase is on the cards now, which puts us very close to the critical 2%.
And that's a prediction of the models. But actually, in the early months of 2016 have already shown that. So we don't know how 2016 is going to continue. But that is a worrying problem.
Because what would happen if we reach 2%?
Oh, there are some shocking predictions, actually, that you see where places in the Middle East, for example, that are already experiencing temperatures sometimes in excess of 50 degrees, I think, this year, become essentially uninhabitable for certain periods of time. So it exacerbates, sea level rise, etc. What it does, it exacerbates some of the problems we're seeing. We just spoke about refugee problems. If you begin to get large shifts in climate very fast, then human populations have to respond. So how do you respond on very short timescales? One of the things you do is you move. So again, I emphasise it's the same answer as the answer to the last question, I think. This is now a clear global problem. The absolute consensus is that human action is leading to an increase in average temperatures. Absolute consensus. I know you may try to argue with that, but you can't.
No, not in my
But therefore, but the key point is, can we respond to it? Do we have the political institutions and the political will and the organisation globally to respond to this challenge? And that worries me immensely. I don't think we do at the moment.
I'm going to go quickly to Malcolm Roberts. We want to hear from all the panellists on this.
Sure. The longest temperature record for temperatures on this planet is the Central England temperature record, which goes back to the mid-1600s. And the latest in the 17th century, the latest warming cycle in the 17th century going into the 18th century was faster and greater than the latest warming, which finished in 1995. And Justin Bieber wasn't flying his private jet around in the 1600s. That's the first thing. The second thing was we've had a pause in this so-called warming for now 21 years. Depends how you measure it, 21 years. And I'm absolutely stunned that someone who is inspired by Richard Feynman, a fantastic scientist who believes in empirical evidence, is quoting a consensus.
Can I just say, I brought the graph, right? I mean, can I just... Okay, let me just tell you where the pause is. The pause that's often quoted. There's if you take this point here, which is about 1997, I think, and you ignore 2015 and 2016, you can choose that point and you can draw a slightly straighter trend line on there. But that's a misunderstanding. The question is, does that rise? And also, secondly, I brought another graph because I've heard it. Is it correlated with that, which is the graph that shows the CO2 emissions, the CO2 in parts per million in the atmosphere? And you see that peak there? where it goes flying up. So the question essentially is, first of all, are those two things correlated? And secondly, do we understand the physical mechanisms? And we understood those since the 19th century.
Brian,
I mean, I can teach you.
Can you go back to the
I'll give
middle
you a
of the
lesson
graph?
if you want. I can give you.
Can you go back to the middle of the graph there?
Yeah, that graph.
Yeah, the peak in the middle.
Yep,
What year is that?
that's about 1941.
Yeah, 1930s and 40s were warmer than the current decades. Where's that?
Well, no,
what's the data source?
Well, not exactly.
No, the original records are.
I don't know
The
whether we
original
should argue
records
about
are. The
graphs.
original records are far warmer. But the other thing that tells me that graph has got something wrong with it is that 1998 was about the same as 2015-16.
Okay, I'm just going to pause here. So you're
That's
hearing.
correct.
You're hearing.
It was an El Nino year.
Both were El Nino years.
You're,
That's the
you're,
point you're taking out
Malcolm,
of context.
just one second.
Hold
You're
on.
hearing the interpretation of a highly qualified scientist, and you're just saying, "I don't believe it." Is that right?
I'm saying two things. I'm saying two things. First of all, that the data has been corrupted, and we know that the
What do you
1930s were
mean by
warmer than today.
corrupted?
Yeah.
Corrupted? What do you mean corrupted?
Been manipulated and
By
by NASA. By the
NASA?
yes.
The
Hang on a
people.
second,
Hang on a
guys.
minute. No, see, this is quite serious.
No, I'm going to just
It
ask
is
the audience.
serious.
Just hang on. We've actually got to
Yes.
hear what's being said here. So it's all very well to laugh, but we want to hear what's being said.
Steve Goddard, he has shown the NASA figures, and the graph was originally showing that 1930s were warmer than recent decades, and that is correct. And people have recognised that for many, many years. And in the recent years, they've been reversed so that the 1930s were reduced in temperature and the later periods were inflated in temperature. That's a fact. Now, the Bureau of Meteorology is exactly the same. And Greg Hunt squashed an investigation of the Bureau of Meteorology earlier this year.
Okay, all right, Greg Hunt.
Can I just check one thing? NASA. Now, NASA.
Yes.
The people that landed men on the moon.
Oh, don't start with
I
that.
should just ask, actually, you believe we landed men on the moon? But,
See the little trick there?
no.
It's
But-
questioning whether or not I believe that I'm a moon skeptic. Now,
Are you?
no, I'm not.
Oh, right. No, but I mean, it's a serious accusation. I mean,
is
the idea
serious.
that NASA and presumably, I should say to people, by the way, that the Australian Academy of Science have done a brilliant. You can never get any sense on programs like this. They're adversarial and things. But the Science of Climate Change, the Australian Academy of Sciences report is superb. I brought it because I'm going to come and give it to you in a minute, so you can have a read. But that's very good if you want to see. But the point is that the accusation that NASA, pretty all the Australian, the Met Office in the UK, everybody is collaborating to manipulate global temperature data.
Are you
It's
accusing
quite
me of saying they're collaborating?
What, they've all manipulated it in the same way and accidentally got to the same answer. Is that what you're saying?
NASA was led by James Hansen.
What about the Met
notorious
Office in
activist.
the UK then?
Well, this could go around all night.
Well, I know it could, yes.
It
all
could
right.
go around all night. I want to hear
But
from
no,
Greg.
it's a
Greg
strange
Hunt's been accused
accusation,
of
though.
stopping an investigation into the truth of the things that Malcolm Roberts is saying. So you get a chance to answer here, and please go ahead.
Sure. So, look, I think from my perspective, from the government's perspective, what we do is we take the advice of not just our agencies, but the international agencies as well. But in particular, the Bureau of Meteorology, the CSIRO, the Department of the Environment, Department of Industry, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, all have very similar views that you've had an increase in CO2 parts per million from about 280 to 400 parts per million from about 1750. You've had an increase of about 1 degree in global temperatures just over the last century. And what you see as part of that, obviously, is the physical impact. The international community, though, comes to very similar conclusions. The World Meteorological Organization, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, NASA, all of these different organisations, and I don't think that they are either subject to a collective folly, nor do I think that they're subject to some sort of conspiratorial collusion. I respect the right of people to have their different views, but we don't make our policy on that. Our policy is that it's real and it's important and it's significant, and therefore we played a role at the Paris conference. We're achieving our targets, and perhaps the most important thing Australia has done in the last 10 years in this space is we helped broker the Montreal Protocol Agreement last November, which will deliver 90 billion tonnes of emissions reductions between now and 2050. Probably the most important thing that Australia's done in this space.
I'm going to bring in, I was going to bring in Lily first because I want to hear from a mathematician now. We've heard from the scientist.
Well, first of all, I cannot believe we're still having this conversation. I feel like we should be moving on and discussing how we're going to create mitigation processes, how we're going to create adaptation processes. I think that as far as I'm concerned, the conversation is over. The second thing I want to say is that there is overwhelming consensus with climate change scientists that this is real. These are scientists who have studied in this particular area for many years in their particular field. I don't know how a lay person can go and look at graphs and come to their own conclusions, because you're potentially leaving yourself open to cherry-picking information, like a particular year was down and coming to false conclusions. This is all taken into account with experts who have studied in this field. You don't ask your architect to read your medical charts, just as you don't ask your accountant to perform surgery on you. These are all experts in their field, and they advise us on what is real and what is not real. And as far as I'm concerned, where politics comes into play is how to implement their advice.
As far as I'm concerned, politics should be based on empirical evidence. All policy should be based on empirical evidence. I've heard consensus, which is not science. I've heard appeals to authority, which is not science. I've heard various illusions.
Hang on.
I've heard. Hang on.
The evidence.
Hang on, Brian. You showed me a graph of temperature.
Yeah, but I can show you.
You showed me a graph of temperature, but no one has ever explained cause and effect. What is important in science?
Hang on,
one of your inspirers is Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman says it doesn't matter how beautiful, how emotional your theory. If the evidence does not suit, it is wrong. That's what Richard Feynman says. And what we need is not just empirical evidence.
Can I have 1 minute?
We need empirical. Hang on.
Yeah,
we need empirical evidence that demonstrates and proves cause and effect. Greg Hunt says he relies on advice. I have never ever heard Greg Hunt say that he relies on data.
Let me tell you what I rely on.
Outlined the data.
And I won't try
You said
and
you got
talk to the
advice.
panel. I'd like to
data.
talk to particularly the young people that are sitting in front of us this evening. But what I see is I saw my friends go swimming at Maroubra Beach on last Sunday, and that shouldn't happen in August. I go to islands in the Pacific, and they are sinking. They are our neighbours and probably will end up to be environmental refugees to Australia. Thirdly, and we might get to it, the CSIRO cuts that the government has undertaken is just kind of nuts in relation to what's going on in terms of climate change. There are a number of sceptics that exist within the Australian Parliament, and we've heard some of that tonight. But most importantly, what we're talking about and what we're arguing about is in fact what these young people in front of us are going to be living in a real way. And that to me should be the absolute starting point for the work that should be done by governments and others, including everyone in this audience. We can all have a role in dealing with climate change, but surely the overwhelming thing for young people, and I've got a son and a daughter, is that we are inheriting this and how stressful that must be for a young person.
Now, Brian, you asked for a minute, and you wanted to respond to
a broader
Malcolm
point about how you would do science and this issue in general. So it's obviously a sensible, as you said, a very important question to ask. What will our climate be like? Which is essentially the probability of weather. What's it going to be like in 2050 and 2100 under different scenarios? Given that we understand the physical mechanism for greenhouse warming, etc. I mean, you were right in one thing you said, which is that CO2 is essential for life. It is. The temperature on the surface of the Earth would be very low, below freezing, if it wasn't for the fact that we had a greenhouse effect. You see that on Venus as well. So we understand the physical mechanisms. But the point is, it's a legitimate question and a very important question to ask. What if we carry on emitting greenhouse gases at this rate or an increased rate or a decreased rate, what do we think will be the impact on the climate in 50 years' time?
We can only answer that question if we understand it now.
So, yes, so the way you do that is you make measurements now of temperatures, sea levels, Arctic ice volume, etc., etc., etc. And then you try and model the climate in order to make a prediction about the future. Now, that's the only way that you can make a prediction about the future. There is no other way. So you can check the models.
But Brian, the models have already been proven wrong, hopelessly wrong.
Well, no.
Yes, they have.
You cross-check them into the past, for example, they do quite nicely. They have a large but actually shrinking error range on them.
But
the question is, if you don't do that, if you don't model, which is a central part of the scientific process, how do you go about answering the question, which, as you said, our young people here have a right to ask, which is, what will the world be like in 2050, in 2075, in 2100? If you don't model it, this is my question to you, if you don't model it, how can you go about trying to answer the question?
The models that the IPCC uses are unvalidated and erroneous and have already been proven hopelessly wrong. And that's a fact.
That wasn't my question.
That wasn't my question.
How would you go about answering the question?
You answer the question by making projections based on models, providing the models are validated and have been proven to be accurate. And the models have already been proven to be inaccurate, and the IPCC has recognised that and admitted it. Now, what we need to do is look at the empirical data, and the empirical data says quite categorically that the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are a result of temperature changes.
No, that's flat out wrong.
No, it's not. That's correct.
It is flat out
I've looked at the data that the
Sorry,
UN
just hang on. He listened to you,
wrong.
and now you have to listen to him.
It is wrong. Let me just. All right, I'll just give you one snapshot. So I took a snapshot of the different bits of evidence for 2015. So global upper ocean heat content, highest on record in 2015. Global sea level, highest on record in 2015. 70 millimetres higher than that observed in 1993. Global surface temperature, highest on record. El Nino, something like a 10 to 40% contribution to that. And tropical cyclones, well above average overall. As you said, even the anecdotal data. I actually had a wonderful. I was going to comment a story then, but I won't do because it'll take too long. But as you said, so the point is, you go evidence. Arctic continued to warm, sea ice extent low, Arctic land surface temperature in 2015 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit above 1981 to 210 average. But the point is, the key point is that if you don't accept that the only way to try to formulate policy on what we do with emissions is to build models, that's the only way you can predict the future. Otherwise, you have tarot cards.
Just before you come in, Malcolm, I'm going to interrupt because I want to hear from the Science Minister, because in the end, the government has to decide whether to trust the models and to act and make policy on the basis of them. Will you continue to do that?
Sure, of course we will. For the viewers at home, we have an audience here which includes lots of sort of dangerously bright-looking young people. And part of our sacred trust is to make the best policy we can based on our best understanding of the science. Whether it's the anecdotal evidence, whether it is the advice of the agencies, whether it's the data, whether it's the World Meteorological Organisation, it all points in the same direction. Having said that, we then have to get the right policies which will actually reduce emissions, and the only way to do that is to do this, as Brian says, at a global level, which was why the Paris conference was such a shining moment in contemporary human history. You know, a very sort of broken world in many ways, lots of challenges. People came together, countries came together, all the different cultures and religions were present, and there was a commitment for real global action on this topic, and that, I think, was a moment of paramount hope in the world that we live in.
But Minister, with respect, why have you smashed the CSIRO?
That's a ridiculous comment.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you because we have a question. I'm sorry.
No, I will take that on if that's all right.
You can in a minute. But we actually have a question.
Now, Tony.
We have a question on the topic, and we'll go to the question first. So we'll go to Anastasia.